At Christmas, my son-in-law Jason looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, my mom's trailer in Ohio is just too cramped for your wheelchair, so it is easier if you stay here alone this year." My daughter Sarah just sat there staring at her plate, silent. I smiled and told them to have a safe trip. 3 days later, I was sitting in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in Maui, wearing my favorite Hawaiian shirt, right as Jason was walking in to toast, with a glass of champagne, paid for with my credit card. The look on his face when he saw me was worth every single penny of the $50,000 he stole from me. Before I tell you how I dismantled his entire life in 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who paid for the lifestyle they are enjoying. My name is Harrison Caldwell, and for 40 years I ran one of the largest logistics companies out of Chicago, moving freight across oceans and continents. I retired 5 years ago after my wife passed away, thinking I had earned a quiet life. But silence can be dangerous because it makes people think you are weak. It makes people like my son-in-law Jason think you are just a senile old man waiting to die. It was December 20th, and the air in the dining room was so cold you could see your breath, but it had nothing to do with the winter storm outside. Jason was cutting his steak with an aggression that always bothered me, like he was trying to kill the animal twice. He put his fork down and wiped his mouth with the napkin I bought, pretending to look concerned. "Harrison," he started using my first name, which he only did when he was about to deliver bad news or ask for money. "We have been talking, and we think it is best if you do not come to Ohio with us this year." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face essentially blank. I looked at Sarah, hoping she would speak up, hoping she would remember that Christmas was the only time I really felt like a person since her mother died. She refused to meet my eyes. Her hand was trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. Jason continued, his voice dripping with that fake corporate empathy he used to sell overpriced condos. "My mom's place is small, Dad. The hallways are narrow. With your hip acting up and that wheelchair, it is just a liability. We would spend the whole holiday worrying about you instead of relaxing. It is for your own good, really. We will stock the fridge and the nurse will come by on Tuesday." I looked down at my hands. Yes, my hip hurt. Yes, I used a cane and occasionally a wheelchair for long distances. But I was not an invalid. I was 76, not 90. I lived in a 5-bedroom house in Lake Forest that I paid for in cash in 1985. I had raised Sarah here. I had nursed my wife here until her last breath. And now I was being told I was a liability in my own family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that his mother's trailer in Ohio could fit inside my garage. But I saw the fear in Sarah's eyes. She was terrified of him, terrified of his temper, terrified of his disapproval. If I fought this now, she would be the one to pay the price in the car ride later. So I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump. I made my hands shake a little as I reached for my wine. "You are right, Jason," I said, my voice cracking just enough to sell the performance. "The travel is hard on me these days. Maybe a quiet week here is what the doctor ordered." I saw the relief wash over him. It wasn't relief that I would be safe. It was the relief of a predator who realized the prey had stopped struggling. He patted my hand patronizingly. "That is the spirit, Harrison. We will call you on Christmas morning." Dinner finished quickly after that. They were in a rush to leave, claiming they had an early start to drive to Ohio the next morning. I walked them to the door, leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part they wanted to see. Jason was bustling around, checking his pockets, checking his phone, acting the big shot. He paused by the door to put on his coat, and that was when he made his first mistake. He raised his left wrist to check the time. His Apple Watch lit up in the dim hallway. I have 20/20 vision with my glasses on, and 40 years of reading shipping manifests has trained my eyes to catch details that other people miss. The screen didn't show the time. It showed a notification from the Delta Airlines app. Gate change flight DL348 to OGG. I blinked. I knew airport codes the way other people knew their children's birthdays. CMH was Columbus, Ohio. OGG was Kahului, Maui. I froze for a split second. Ohio. He had said Ohio 5 times during dinner. He had talked about the snow in Ohio. He had complained about his mother's heating bill in Ohio. But you do not fly to Maui to visit a trailer park in the Midwest. I watched him swipe the notification away, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked at me and said, "Get some rest, old man. Don't wait up." Sarah gave me a quick hug, her body stiff and cold. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, and for a second I thought she was going to confess. I thought she was going to tell me that they were using my money to go to a 5-star resort while leaving me alone to eat frozen dinners. But she pulled away and walked out into the snow without looking back. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the house fell into a silence that was deafening. I stood there for a moment, listening to the engine of his leased BMW fade down the driveway. Then I straightened my back. I dropped the cane. It clattered onto the marble floor, echoing through the empty foyer. I walked to the window and watched their taillights disappear. My hip throbbed, but the adrenaline flooding my system numbed the pain. I turned around and walked straight to my study. I did not need the wheelchair. I needed answers. My study was my sanctuary. Mahogany walls, shelves lined with books on maritime law and economics, and my desk a solid slab of oak that had seen me negotiate deals worth hundreds of millions. I sat down and opened my laptop. Jason thought I was technologically illiterate because I still liked to read physical newspapers. He did not realize that I managed a personal stock portfolio that generated more money in a week than he made in a year. I logged into my primary banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. 2-factor authentication. Retinal scan. I was in. I went straight to the trust accounts. I had set up several trusts over the years. One for Sarah's future, one for potential grandchildren, and one called the Caldwell Medical Trust. It was designed for catastrophic health emergencies. If I ever needed surgery or long-term care that insurance wouldn't cover, the money was there. I had given Sarah power of attorney over that specific account 6 months ago, just in case I became incapacitated. I trusted her. I trusted her with my life. I clicked on the transaction history, and the air left my lungs. Pending transaction. Dated today, December 20th. $50,000. The recipient wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a specialized care facility. It was a withdrawal labeled emergency medical reimbursement transferred to a holding account that I recognized. It was a joint account Sarah shared with Jason. But the notes attached to the transfer in the bank's internal memo system, which they clearly didn't think I would check, referenced a travel agency invoice. I sat back in my leather chair, feeling a cold fury settle in my chest. It wasn't the money. I had $45 million in assets. 50,000 was a rounding error. It was the audacity. It was the lie. He looked me in the face, ate my steak, drank my wine, and told me I was too crippled to travel while he stole the money I set aside for my own health to fund a tropical vacation. And he dragged my daughter into it. He made her an accomplice to felony embezzlement. I closed my eyes and pictured Jason's face. The smugness, the arrogance. He thought he had won. He thought the old lion was toothless. He thought I would sit here for 7 days, watching reruns of old westerns, eating leftovers, waiting for a phone call that would never come. He was wrong. I picked up my phone. It was 11:30 at night. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Thomas O'Malley. Tom had been my corporate counsel for 40 years. He knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the graves, legally speaking. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Harrison, is everything all right? It is nearly midnight. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Tom, wake up. Go downstairs and make yourself a pot of coffee because you are going to be working all night." "Harrison, what is going on? Did you fall?" "No," I said, my voice steady and cold as the winter ice outside. I didn't fall, Tom, but Jason is about to. My son-in-law just transferred $50,000 from the medical trust to pay for a trip to Hawaii. He told me he was going to Ohio and left me here to rot. There was a pause on the line, then the sound of rustling sheets and a lamp clicking on. I could hear the shift in Tom's voice from sleepy friend to shark lawyer. That is embezzlement, Harrison, and elder abuse. We can have him arrested before he lands. No, I said. Arresting him is too easy. If we arrest him now, he plays the victim. He says it was a misunderstanding. He says Sarah authorized it. He makes my daughter take the fall. I want him destroyed, Tom. I want him to feel what it is like to be powerless. I want to humiliate him in front of the very people he is trying to impress. So what is the plan, Harrison? Tom asked, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. He missed the old days of corporate raids just as much as I did. I looked at the empty room at the cane lying on the floor. I want you to activate Protocol B, I said. Protocol B? Tom repeated slowly. The hostile takeover protocol. Harrison, that is the nuclear option. That freezes everything. It locks the assets, it flags the credit lines, it notifies the board. Exactly, I said. Do it. And Tom booked me a flight. To where? To Maui, I said. First class. And get me a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I checked the flight details on the screen again. Get me a room on the floor directly above Jason. I want to be able to hear him scream when his credit card gets declined. I hung up the phone. The house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a war room. I stood up and walked to the wall safe hidden behind the portrait of my late wife. I spun the dial. Click, 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 thud. The heavy door swung open. Inside was my passport, a stack of cash, and my Centurion card, the black titanium card that Jason knew existed but had never seen. I looked at my wife's face in the painting. I am sorry, Lillian, I whispered. I tried to be nice. I tried to keep the peace for Sarah's sake. But he mistook my kindness for weakness. Now I have to show him the difference. I packed my bag in 20 minutes. I didn't pack the orthopedic shoes Jason made me wear. I packed my Italian loafers. I didn't pack the beige cardigans Sarah bought me because they looked safe. I packed my linen suits and my silk shirts. By the time the town car arrived at 4 a.m. to take me to O'Hare Airport, I wasn't Harrison the frail retiree anymore. I was Harrison Caldwell, the CEO, the Shark of Chicago, and I was going hunting. As the car slid through the dark streets, the snow falling softly on the windshield, I pulled up the Delta app on my own phone. I saw their flight. They were currently somewhere over Nebraska. Jason was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of Mai Tais and hula girls, thinking he had pulled off the perfect crime. He had no idea that the man he left behind was currently cruising at 70 miles per hour to cut him off at the pass. The flight to Maui was long, but I didn't sleep. I spent the time reading the dossier Tom had sent me. It was worse than I thought. Jason wasn't just a thief, he was a desperate gambler. The credit card debt was astronomical. He had leveraged their house, my gift to Sarah, to cover losses in online poker. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a Hail Mary pass. He was going there to meet wealthy investors to try and scam them into a non-existent real estate fund. And he was using my money to fund the con. I sipped my champagne as the plane began its descent over the Pacific. The water was a brilliant turquoise blue, so different from the gray slush of Chicago. The pilot announced our arrival in Kahului. I adjusted my sunglasses and smiled. Jason wanted me to stay home. He wanted a Christmas without the old man. Well, he was going to get his wish. He wouldn't see the old man. He was going to meet the boss. And the boss was about to fire him from the family permanently. The morning sun hit the snow outside my window with a blinding glare, but for the first time in years, I did not wake up feeling old. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It was the silence of a command center before the strike. I sat up on the edge of my bed and looked at the cane leaning against the nightstand. It was a sturdy piece of oak that Sarah had bought me 3 years ago, insisting that I needed it for balance. For 3 years, I had leaned on it not because I physically couldn't walk without it, but because it made them feel useful. It made me non-threatening. It made me the harmless grandfather in the corner. I stood up and kicked the cane over. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, and I left it there. I would not be needing it where I was going. I walked into my walk-in closet and pushed aside the beige cardigans and sensible slacks that Sarah always laid out for me. Way in the back, protected by a garment bag, was the armor of my past life. My bespoke Italian suits, charcoal gray tailored to fit a man who commanded boardrooms, not a man who napped in recliners. I pulled out a navy blazer and a crisp white linen shirt. As I buttoned the shirt, I looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the fragile dependent Jason thought he had left behind. This was Harrison Caldwell, the man who had negotiated with union leaders and shipping magnates without blinking. I moved to the master bathroom and shaved off the white stubble, leaving my jaw clean and sharp. Then came the most important part. I went to the wall safe behind the painting in the study. I spun the dial and pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside sat stacks of cash and documents, but I reached for the small velvet box in the corner. I opened it. Inside was my American Express Centurion card. The black titanium card was cold to the touch. This wasn't just a credit card. It was a key that opened any door in the world and closed any argument. Jason had flaunted his gold card at dinner, trying to impress me. He didn't know that my card had a spending limit that could buy his entire existence 3 times over. I slipped it into my wallet, along with my passport. I didn't pack a large suitcase. I took a single leather weekender bag, tossing in only the essentials. I wasn't going to Maui to vacation. I was going to work. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was smooth. I had called a private car service, not the Uber, that Jason always insisted on using to save money. The Lincoln Navigator glided over the icy highway. The driver was professional and silent, exactly how I liked it. When we pulled up to the terminal, I didn't go to the main entrance where the holiday crowds were fighting over luggage carts and screaming at exhausted ticket agents. We pulled around to the private suite entrance, a separate terminal reserved for those who valued their time more than their money. I stepped out of the car, and the cold Chicago wind hit my face, but it felt invigorating. I handed my bag to the porter and walked inside. The lounge was quiet, smelling of fresh espresso and expensive leather. As I was handing my passport to the concierge, a voice boomed from across the room. "Harrison! Harrison Caldwell, is that you?" I turned to see Michael Sterling. Michael was the CEO of the airline I was about to fly with. We had done business together in the late 90s when my logistics company handled the ground freight for his cargo division. He looked older now, grayer, but he still had the energy of a man running a Fortune 500 company. "Michael," I said, extending my hand. "It has been a long time." He gripped my hand firmly. "Too long, Harrison. I heard you retired. I thought you were out on a golf course somewhere in Florida, not braving a Chicago winter." I smiled a tight, controlled smile. "Retirement is a relative term, Michael. Sometimes you have to come back to the field to handle a little quality control." Michael laughed loud and hearty. "Quality control, I bet. You were always the only man who could spot a decimal error in a shipping manifest from across the room. Listen, are you flying with us today?" "I am," I said. "Heading to Maui." Michael turned to the concierge immediately. "Upgrade him. Whatever he booked, put him in the Delta One suites. And flag his seat for the captain's personal attention. This man is the reason half our cargo logistics makes sense. Treat him like royalty." I didn't decline. I didn't play humble. I nodded my thanks. "Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the courtesy." We spoke for a few more minutes about the market and the rising fuel costs. It was a brief conversation, but it served a purpose. It reminded me of who I was. To Jason, I was just Sarah's dad, the guy who needed help opening a jar of pickles. To men like Michael Sterling, I was a titan. I was a force of industry. As I walked toward the private security screening, I felt my posture straighten even more. I wasn't sneaking onto this flight. I was commanding it. Boarding was effortless. A private BMW drove me across the tarmac directly to the plane. I walked up the stairs and settled into my suite in the first-class cabin. The flight attendant, named Jessica, appeared instantly with a glass of Dom Perignon. "Mr. Caldwell." "The captain asked me to welcome you personally," she said, placing the crystal flute on the linen coaster. "If there is anything you need, anything at all, please let me know." I took a sip of the champagne. It was crisp and cold. I reclined the leather seat and opened my iPad. It was time to study the enemy. Before I left the house, I had forwarded the dossier Tom had compiled to my secure cloud. I opened the file labeled Jason Miller Financials. What I saw made the champagne taste almost bitter. I knew Jason wasn't good with money. I knew he liked flashy things. But I didn't know he was drowning. The PDF was a roadmap of a man living on borrowed time. First, there were the credit cards. 7 of them, all maxed out. The interest rates were predatory, hovering around 25%. He was making minimum payments, shuffling debt from one card to another in a shell game that was about to collapse. Then there was the car, the Range Rover. He drove to my house. The one he bragged was a custom order. It was leased, and he was 3 months behind on payments. The repossession order had been issued 2 weeks ago. He was hiding the car in his mother's garage in Ohio to avoid the tow trucks. That explained why he wanted to drive my sedan to the airport. But the real smoking gun was the gambling, online poker, and crypto speculation. The transaction history was a bloody mess of losses. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. He wasn't investing. He was throwing money into a furnace, hoping the fire would spit back gold. I scrolled down to the mortgage on the house. The house I had given them the down payment for. The house Sarah loved. He had taken out a second mortgage without telling her. A home equity line of credit that was nearly tapped out. He had forged her signature. I zoomed in on the document. It was a clumsy forgery, close enough to pass a tired bank clerk, but it wouldn't stand up to a forensic analysis for 5 seconds. This trip to Maui wasn't a vacation. It was a desperate Hail Mary. He was chasing a potential investor, a man named oblivious to the fact that Jason was radioactive. Jason needed to land a big client to cover the second mortgage before the bank sent a foreclosure notice to the house and Sarah found out. He wasn't just using my money to have fun. He was using my money to delay his execution. I looked out the window as the plane banked over the clouds, leaving the gray winter of Chicago behind. The sky above was a piercing blue. Jason thought he was smart. He thought he could move pieces on a board without anyone noticing. But he forgot the first rule of logistics. You never ship cargo you can't pay for. He had shipped himself and my daughter to a 5-star resort on a stolen dime. And now, the bill collector was at 30,000 feet, closing in at 500 miles per hour. I took another sip of champagne. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy. What I felt was cold and precise. It was the feeling of a surgeon standing over a patient with a scalpel. Jason was a tumor attached to my family, and I was going to cut him out. I closed the iPad and leaned my head back. I didn't sleep. I spent the next 8 hours planning every word I would say when I saw him. I visualized the look on his face. I rehearsed the destruction of his ego. The flight attendant came by to offer dinner, but I declined. I wasn't hungry for food. I was hungry for justice. The plane hummed a steady rhythm, carrying me toward the inevitable collision. The old man was gone. The shark of Chicago was awake, and he smelled blood in the water. The air in Maui was thick with the scent of plumeria and money, a cloying sweetness that usually signaled relaxation, but today it just smelled like betrayal. The Ritz-Carlton Kapalua rose from the coastline like a fortress of luxury, its white walls gleaming against the deep green of the golf course, and the endless blue of the Pacific. I stepped out of the black SUV, and for a moment, the humidity hit me, making my joints ache. I instinctively reached for the cane I had left behind in Chicago, but my hand grabbed only empty air. I straightened my back. The cane was a crutch for the old Harrison. The man walking into this lobby did not need support. He needed a clear line of sight. I walked to the front desk, avoiding the main check-in line where families were arguing over room keys and luggage. I went straight to the club-level concierge. The young woman behind the desk looked up, her smile professional and practiced. "Welcome to the Ritz-Carlton, sir. How may I assist you today?" I placed my passport on the marble counter, but I kept my hand over the bottom half covering the name Caldwell. "I am checking in under my middle name, expecting a reservation for Robert." My assistant called ahead. She typed quickly, her manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. "Ah, yes, Mr. Robert. We have you in the Royal Pacific Suite, the presidential unit. It is fully prepped." I slid the black Centurion card across the counter. "Keep this on file for incidentals, and I value my privacy. If anyone asks for a Mr. Caldwell, I am not here. Do you understand?" She glanced at the heavy metal card, then back at me, her eyes widening just a fraction. The Centurion card commands a specific type of respect in the service industry. It says that you are not just rich, you are powerful enough to ruin careers with a single phone call. "Understood completely, sir," she said, lowering her voice. "You are a ghost. A ghost. That is exactly what I was." I took the key card and declined the offer of a bellboy. I carried my own leather bag to the elevator. The hallway on the top floor was silent, lined with expensive art and hushed lighting. I found my suite at the end of the corridor. It was massive, larger than my first house. A living room with white sofas, a dining table for 8, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the ocean like a masterpiece. But I didn't look at the ocean. I dropped my bag on the sofa and walked straight to the sliding glass doors. I stepped out onto the balcony. The wind whipped at my linen shirt. We were high up, but the acoustics of the resort were designed to carry sound. I could hear the distant splash of water, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of hundreds of guests enjoying the holiday. I pulled a pair of compact, high-powered binoculars from my bag. I had bought them at the airport duty-free shop. They were German, made calm and precise, just like me. I lifted them to my eyes and adjusted the focus. The pool area below sprang into sharp relief. It was a sprawling complex of blue water cabanas and palm trees. I scanned the crowd passing over honeymooners and noisy children until I found them. My stomach turned over. It wasn't just Jason and Sarah. It was a takeover. Jason had commandeered 3 of the prime cabanas right by the main pool. He was lying on a chaise lounge wearing a pair of swimming trunks that were too tight and sunglasses that were too big. He looked like a king in a kingdom he didn't own. Sarah was sitting next to him under the shade of an umbrella, looking pale and withdrawn. She was reading a book, but she wasn't turning the pages. But they weren't alone. In the cabana next to them was a woman I recognized with a jolt of distaste. Patricia, Jason's mother. The woman who claimed she couldn't afford to fix her own furnace last winter was currently sipping a blended cocktail with a pineapple wedge the size of a fist, and next to her was Kelly, Jason's sister, laughing loudly at something a waiter was saying. There were others too, people I didn't recognize, children running around screaming, causing a scene. Jason had brought his entire clan. He had flown them all here on my dime. I watched through the lenses as a server approached their group with a silver tray. He set down 2 bottles of champagne. Not the house sparkling wine, but Cristal. I watched Jason wave his hand dismissively and point to the folder the waiter was holding. The bill. Jason didn't even look at it. He grabbed the pen and signed with a flourish, a big sweeping signature that I knew wasn't his real name. He was signing my name. Or perhaps he was signing Sarah's, knowing that my trust fund would cover it automatically. He laughed, throwing his head back, and clinked glasses with his mother. They were toasting. They were celebrating their cleverness. celebrating the fact that the old man was freezing in Chicago eating TV dinners while they drank $500 champagne in paradise. I lowered the binoculars for a second, breathing hard. The rage was a physical thing, a hot stone in my chest. But I forced myself to look again. I needed to see everything. I needed to catalog every sin. I zoomed in on Patricia. She was sitting up now, applying sunscreen to her shoulders. The sunlight caught something around her neck, a flash of blue fire. I frowned and adjusted the focus wheel until the image was crystal clear. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold in the tropical heat. Around her neck, resting against her sunburned skin, was a sapphire pendant surrounded by a halo of diamonds. It was unmistakable. The center stone was a midnight blue cashmere sapphire, unheated, rare, and incredibly valuable. I gripped the balcony railing so hard my knuckles turned white. That wasn't just jewelry. That was Lillian's necklace. I remembered the day I bought it. It was our 40th anniversary. We were in London. Lillian had seen it in a shop window on Bond Street and whispered that it was too beautiful for her. I went back the next day and bought it. She wore it to our anniversary dinner, and she looked like a queen. When she died, she made me promise to give it to Sarah. "It is for special occasions, Harry," she had said, "for when our girl needs to feel brave." I had given it to Sarah on her wedding day. I told her it was a piece of her mother's soul and that she should guard it with her life. Sarah had cried and promised she would keep it in the safety deposit box, only taking it out for the most important events. And now it was hanging around the neck of Patricia Miller, a woman who had once asked me if she could smoke in my car, a woman who had never shown my daughter an ounce of genuine kindness. Jason must have forced Sarah to bring it, or worse, he had stolen it from their home safe and given it to his mother to show off. "Look at us," he was saying. "Look at how rich we are. We drip in diamonds." I watched Patricia touch the stone, her fingers greasy with sunscreen. She turned to Kelly and said something, pointing to the necklace. Kelly laughed and reached out to touch it too. They were treating a sacred family heirloom, like a trinket from a swap meet. The conflict inside me shifted. Before this moment, it was about money. It was about disrespect. It was about fraud. But now it was war. They hadn't just stolen my cash. They had desecrated my memory. They had taken the symbol of my love for my dead wife and draped it over their greed. I stared at Sarah through the binoculars. She was looking at the necklace too. I could see the pain in her face. She knew. She knew this was wrong. But she sat there silent. Her silence was louder than Jason's laughter. She had let this happen. She had let these wolves into the henhouse and watched them devour everything. I lowered the binoculars slowly. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a fury so pure it felt like clarity. I turned back to the empty suite. The luxury around me felt suffocating. I didn't want to rest. I didn't want to unpack. I walked to the desk and picked up the hotel phone. I dialed the front desk. "This is the Royal Pacific Suite." I said, my voice dropping an octave into the tone I used to fire incompetent managers. "Connect me to the Loss Prevention Department immediately. And I want the Director of Security, not a subordinate." I waited, listening to the hold music. I looked at my reflection in the glass door. The man staring back wasn't a father anymore. He wasn't a grandfather. He was an executioner. Jason wanted to play the big shot. He wanted to live a life he didn't earn. Well, he was about to learn that everything has a price. And the bill for that sapphire necklace was going to be more expensive than he could ever imagine. The line clicked. "This is Mr. Henderson, Director of Security. How can I help you, sir?" "Mr. Henderson," I said, calm and cold. "My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am a majority shareholder in the holding company that owns this property. I am currently in your presidential suite. I need you to come up here right now. We have a situation involving grand larceny and identity theft taking place at your main pool. and bring the local police liaison. We are going to ruin a Christmas party." I changed out of my linen suit and into a disguise that was effective precisely because it was so cliché. I put on a bright floral shirt that I had bought in the gift shop, a pair of oversized aviator sunglasses, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that cast a shadow over most of my face. I looked like every other retired tourist in Hawaii, the kind of man who spent his days drinking Mai Tais and complaining about the heat. I looked harmless. I looked invisible. I checked the voice memo app on my phone to make sure it was running and slipped it into my shirt pocket with the microphone facing out. Then I took the elevator down to the Alaloa Lounge. The bar was crowded with the pre-dinner rush. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, but nobody was looking at the view. They were looking at each other, sizing up net worths and status. I scanned the room and found my target immediately. Kelly was sitting at the bar alone. Her brother and mother were likely still at the pool or getting dressed for dinner, but Kelly had started happy hour early. She was slumped over a half-finished martini, her skin already an angry shade of red from a day in the sun, without enough sunscreen. I walked over and took the stool right next to her. I signaled the bartender and ordered a Scotch neat. Kelly looked over at me, her eyes slightly unfocused. She saw the gray hair and the expensive watch, and she smiled the sloppy smile of a woman who was looking for someone to buy her next round. "Nice watch," she slurred, pointing a manicured finger at my wrist. "My brother has one just like it." "Well, he will have one like it soon." I smiled my best kindly old man smile. "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice low and raspy, different from my usual commanding baritone. "Your brother must be doing well for himself." Kelly let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Doing well, honey. He is about to hit the jackpot. We all are. We are celebrating. It is a family vacation. Best kind of vacation because it is free." I signaled the bartender to refill her glass. "On me," I said. She didn't even say thank you, she just took the drink. "You are sweet. Much nicer than the old miser who is paying for all this." She took a long sip, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim of the glass. "My brother Jason, he is a genius. He married this girl Sarah. Nice girl, but spineless, you know. Just does whatever he says. But her dad, oh my God. You should see this guy. Ancient, cranky, sitting on a mountain of cash, and he acts like buying a cup of coffee is a hardship." I gripped my Scotch glass tighter, but kept my expression pleasant. "Sounds like a difficult man," I said. "Difficult? He is a dinosaur," Kelly said, waving her hand dismissively. "But dinosaurs die right. That is the best part. Jason has it all figured out. We left him back in Chicago. Froze his ass off while we are here living it up. And the best part is, he thinks we are in Ohio, visiting our mom in her trailer park. Can you believe that? He actually believed we went to Ohio in December." I felt a cold chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It is one thing to suspect you are being played. It is another to hear the playbook read aloud by a drunk woman in a hotel bar. I leaned in closer, pretending to be a conspiratorial confidant. "That sounds like a risky game," I said. "What if he finds out?" Kelly scoffed, shaking her head so hard her earrings rattled. "He won't. He is checking out, losing his marbles. Jason says he is barely lucid half the time. And that is the plan. When we get back, Jason is going to make his move. He has the paperwork drawn up already. Power of attorney. He is going to convince Sarah that Daddy is too far gone to manage his own money. Sarah will sign anything if Jason yells loud enough. Once Jason has the signature, it is game over. We sell the big house in Lake Forest, move the old man into a facility, and boom, the fortune is ours. I felt the blood roaring in my ears. A facility. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to lock me away. They were going to strip me of my freedom, my home, and my dignity. They were going to throw me into a warehouse for the dying while they spent my life's work on sports cars and vacations. Which facility? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, who cares? Kelly said, swirling her drink. Somewhere cheap. State-run, maybe. Jason says, why waste the inheritance on fancy nurses for a vegetable? He won't know the difference anyway. I had heard enough. I had the recording. I had the confession. It was clear, it was detailed, and it was damning. I wanted to grab her by her shoulders and shake her. I wanted to tell her that the vegetable was currently sitting next to her, recording her every word. But I held back. The game wasn't over yet. I needed to terrify Jason before I destroyed him. I needed him to sweat. I finished my scotch in one swallow. Well, I said, standing up. Sounds like your brother has everything under control. I hope he enjoys the victory lap. He sure will, Kelly said, raising her glass to the empty air. Cheers to Jason. I walked away from the bar, leaving her to her delusion. I found the floor manager, a sharp-looking man named David, whom I had tipped $100 earlier that afternoon to ensure good service. He was standing near the entrance of the restaurant. Mr. Robert, he said, recognizing me immediately. Is everything to your satisfaction? Everything is proceeding exactly as planned, David, I said. I need a favor. Do you see that man sitting on the terrace? The one in the blue polo shirt laughing too loudly. I pointed through the glass doors. Jason was there. He had come down from the room and was holding court at a large table surrounded by the sycophants he had met at the pool. He looked relaxed. Arrogant. I see him, David said. I want you to bring him a bottle of wine, I said. The 1998 Chateau Margaux. David raised an eyebrow. That is a $2,000 bottle, sir. I know what it costs, I said, pulling out my Centurion card. Put it on my tab. But do not tell him it is from me. Do not tell him who sent it. Just bring it to the table with a note. I took a pen from the host stand and grabbed a piece of thick Ritz-Carlton stationery. I wrote 5 words in block letters so my handwriting wouldn't give me away. Enjoy it while you can. I folded the note and handed it to David. Wait until he pours a glass. Wait until he tastes it. Then give him the note. David nodded, understanding that this was more than just a drink order. Consider it done, sir. I retreated to a shadowed corner of the terrace, hidden behind a large potted palm tree. I needed to watch this. I needed to see the first crack in the armor. 5 minutes later, a waiter approached Jason's table with the bottle. I saw Jason's eyes light up. He loved free things, especially expensive free things. He probably thought it was a gift from the hotel management, recognizing his VIP status. He gestured for the waiter to pour. He swirled the wine in the glass, sniffed it like he knew what he was doing, and took a sip. He nodded approvingly, grinning at his guests, playing the part of the sophisticated connoisseur. Then the waiter handed him the note on a silver tray. Jason picked it up casually, still smiling. He unfolded the paper. I watched through the leaves of the palm tree. The smile didn't just fade, it vanished. He froze. He stared at the note for a long time. He looked up, scanning the restaurant. His head whipped left, then right. He looked at the waiter and asked a question, but the waiter just shook his head and walked away as instructed. Jason looked at the wine glass in his hand. Suddenly, it didn't look like a prize anymore. It looked like a threat. He put the glass down. He looked at the note again. He shoved it into his pocket and stood up. He walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out into the darkness, looking at the other tables. He was searching for a face he recognized. He was searching for a ghost. I saw him pull out his phone. He typed something furiously, probably texting Kelly or Sarah asking if they had ordered it. But nobody orders a $2,000 bottle of wine as a prank. He sat back down, but his posture had changed. The arrogance was gone. He was hunched over. He kept looking over his shoulder. He pushed the wine glass away. I smiled. The seed was planted. He knew someone was watching. He knew someone knew. The paranoia would start to eat at him now. It would ruin his dinner. It would ruin his sleep. And tomorrow, when I revealed myself, he would already be broken. I turned and walked back to the elevators. I had a dinner reservation of my own to get to. And unlike Jason, I was going to enjoy every bite. The sun rose over Kapalua on the morning of December 23rd, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, but I did not take the time to admire the view. I was awake long before the first light hit the water, fueled by a restless energy that felt less like old age and more like the calm before a strategic airstrike. I stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, nursing a cup of black coffee, watching the resort come to life below me. The staff was setting up umbrellas, the pool boys were skimming leaves from the water, and somewhere in one of the luxury suites below, my son-in-law Jason was waking up, likely with a headache from the paranoia I had induced the night before. Today was not about destruction. Destruction is messy and quick. Today was about psychological warfare. I wanted Jason to feel the ground beneath his feet turn into quicksand. I wanted him to question his reality, his safety, and his control. I walked back into the living room and picked up my phone, dialing the private number for the American Express Centurion concierge desk. The phone rang once before a human operator answered. No automated menus for this level of membership. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. How may we assist you today?" The voice was smooth, professional, and ready to move mountains. "I need to speak to the fraud department." I said, my voice steady. Specifically, the team handling the secondary authorized user on my account. I was transferred immediately. When the security officer came on the line, I gave him instructions that were precise and unusual. I did not want to cancel the card Jason was holding. Not yet. Canceling it would force a confrontation too early. I wanted to play with him. "I want you to place a temporary freeze on the secondary card ending in 4098, I said. "Flag it for suspicious activity. Decline any transaction over $500 for the next 60 minutes. After 60 minutes, lift the freeze and let the transactions go through as normal." The officer paused. "You want us to intermittently decline charges, sir?" "Exactly," I said. "If he calls the bank, tell him it is a system security algorithm and that it is being reset. Make him feel like it is a technical glitch. Make him frustrated." "Consider it done, Mr. Caldwell." I hung up the phone and smiled. It was a petty move, perhaps, beneath a man of my stature, but I needed to strip away Jason's confidence layer by layer. He walked around this resort acting like he owned the place, flashing that card like a golden ticket. I wanted to remind him that the ticket could be revoked at any moment. I showered and dressed, opting for a disguise that would allow me to get closer to the action. I put on a pair of beige cargo shorts, a nondescript polo shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. I looked like any other grandfather dragged along on a family vacation. I took the stairs down to the lobby, avoiding the elevators where I might run into them face to face. I tracked them to the luxury shopping arcade located within the resort. It was a corridor of excess lined with boutiques like Louis Vuitton, Tiffany, and Rolex. I saw them through the glass window of a high-end leather goods store. Jason was strutting through the aisles with his chest puffed out, pointing at items with the air of a connoisseur. Sarah was trailing behind him, looking tired. Her shoulders slumped. Patricia, Jason's mother, was oohing and eyeing over a display of handbags, holding up a purse that likely cost more than her mobile home. I loitered outside, pretending to examine a display of sunglasses, but my attention was focused entirely on the drama unfolding inside. I saw Jason pick up the bag Patricia was admiring. It was a bright red leather tote, flashy and expensive. He checked the price tag and didn't even flinch. He walked to the counter with a swagger that made my stomach turn. He slapped the credit card onto the glass counter, not handing it to the clerk, but throwing it down like he was doing her a favor. The sales associate, a young woman with impeccable posture, picked up the card and inserted it into the chip reader. Jason leaned against the counter, drumming his fingers impatiently, talking loudly to his mother about how this bag would make the neighbors back in Ohio jealous. Then came the sound. A sharp, dissonant beep. The clerk looked at the screen and frowned. "I am sorry, sir," she said, her voice polite but audible even through the glass. The transaction was declined. Jason laughed, a loud barking sound. "That is impossible. Try it again. It is an Amex Black card, sweetheart. It doesn't get declined." The clerk removed the card, wiped the chip on her blazer, and inserted it again. We waited. I held my breath, savoring the moment. Beep. Declined. The air in the shop seemed to freeze. Jason's face went from smug to a blotchy shade of red. He snatched the card from the machine. "There is something wrong with your machine," he snapped, his voice rising. "This card has a limit higher than your annual salary. Run it manually." "Sir, the system is flagging it," the clerk said, taking a step back. "I cannot force it through. Do you have another form of payment?" Jason didn't have another form of payment. I knew his personal cards were maxed out. I knew his wallet was full of plastic that was useless. He looked around the shop, noticing that other customers were staring. The humiliation was starting to set in. He looked at Patricia, who was clutching the bag like a lifeline, looking confused and disappointed. "This is ridiculous," Jason shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "I am going to call the bank and have your job for this. This is a glitch, a stupid computer glitch." Then I saw the moment that broke my heart. Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look angry at him. She looked embarrassed for him. She opened her modest purse and pulled out her own debit card. It was the card connected to her personal savings account, the money she earned from her part-time job as a substitute teacher. Money she was saving for a new car. "Try this one," she whispered to the clerk, avoiding Jason's eyes. "No." "Sarah, put that away," Jason hissed, but he didn't stop her. He let her pay. He let his wife drain her savings to buy a $3,000 handbag for his mother because his ego couldn't handle walking out of the store empty-handed. The transaction went through. The clerk bagged the item, handing it to Sarah, not Jason. Jason snatched the bag from Sarah's hands immediately and turned to his mother. "See, Mom, I told you I would get it for you. Stupid bank glitch. I will sort it out later." He didn't say thank you to Sarah. He didn't acknowledge that she had just saved him from public shame. He marched out of the store looking angry and victimized, muttering about incompetence. Sarah followed him, her head down, looking like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. I waited until they were down the hall before I moved. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. He was bleeding her dry financially and emotionally. He was using her as a shield for his own failures. I followed them from a distance. They went back to the main lobby. Jason and his mother headed towards the elevators, likely to drop off the spoils of war. Sarah held back. She told them she needed to use the restroom. As soon as the elevator doors closed, she walked over to a quiet corner of the lobby, near a large fountain, and sat down on a velvet bench. From my vantage point behind a decorative planter, I saw her shoulders start to shake. She wasn't making a sound, but the tears were streaming down her face. She looked so small, so defeated. This was the girl I had raised to be strong, to be independent. And this man had reduced her to this. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to hold her and tell her that Daddy was here and that I would fix everything. But I stopped myself. Comforting her now would only be a temporary fix. She needed to see the truth. She needed to see that the rot in her marriage wasn't just about money or arrogance. It went deeper. I remembered what I had seen the night before. It was 2 a.m, and I couldn't sleep. I was on my balcony, and I saw a figure creeping along the terrace below. It was Jason. He wasn't going for a late-night swim. He was checking his phone, looking around nervously, and then slipping into a room 3 doors down from his own. Room 412. I had checked with my sources at the hotel. Room 412 was registered to a Ms. Chloe Davis, a single tourist from California. Jason didn't come out for an hour. Sarah needed to know. She was crying over a man who wasn't just stealing her money, but was stealing her self-respect. I pulled out the burner phone I had bought specifically for this trip. My hands were shaking slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I was about to break my daughter's heart to save her life. I typed the message slowly, ensuring every word was calculated to trigger the right question. Ask your husband where he was last night at 2 a.m. Ask him who is in room 412. I took a deep breath and hit send. I watched Sarah across the lobby. She wiped her eyes with a tissue and reached into her bag for her phone, likely checking the time. She unlocked the screen. I saw her freeze. She stared at the phone. She read the message once, then again. She looked up, scanning the lobby, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of financial ruin anymore. It was the visceral fear of betrayal. She stood up. Her legs were shaky at first, but then she steadied herself. The sadness in her posture was replaced by a rigid tension. She gripped the phone so hard her knuckles were white. She didn't look around for the sender. She turned towards the elevators. I watched her go. The elevator dinged and the doors opened. She stepped inside with a look on her face that I had not seen since she was a teenager. It was determination. I slipped the burner phone back into my pocket. The game was no longer just about money. I had just handed Sarah the match. Now I had to wait and see if she would burn the house down. I walked to the bar and ordered a whiskey. The real storm was just beginning, and I needed to be ready for the thunder. The sun had set hours ago, and the Ritz-Carlton was glowing like a jewel against the black velvet of the Pacific Ocean. Christmas Eve in Maui is not a quiet affair. It is a spectacle of fire dancers roasting pigs and enough orchids to bury a small town. The air was thick with the smell of jasmine and expensive perfume, but from where I stood in the shadows of the banyan trees near the main lawn, the strongest scent was the stench of Jason's desperation. He had outdone himself tonight. He had secured the largest table at the center of the great lawn, a prime location that usually required a reservation 6 months in advance. I knew he had bribed the maitre d' heavily, probably using the cash advance he had pulled from Sarah's emergency credit card earlier that afternoon. The table was set for 12, but there were only 6 of them initially. Jason, Sarah, his mother, Patricia, his sister Kelly, and her 2 unruly children. But Jason, being Jason, could not abide an audience that knew his secrets, so he had invited strangers. I watched as he waved over a couple he had met at the golf course and another family he had charmed at the pool bar. He was building a court. He was holding court. He needed fresh ears, people who didn't know he was a failure, people who would believe the fantasy he was spinning. I moved closer, staying just outside the ring of tiki torches. I could hear his voice booming over the sound of the ukulele band. He was drunk, not sloppy drunk yet, but filled with the liquid courage of expensive Cabernet. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the back, gesturing with a crystal wine glass that caught the flickering light. "I manage a boutique investment fund out of Chicago," he was saying, to the older man on his right, a retired dentist from New York, who looked impressed by the sheer volume of Jason's confidence. "We focus on high-yield distressed assets. It is a volatile market, but you have to have the stomach for it. You have to be a shark in this water, or you get eaten." I almost laughed out loud. The only thing Jason managed was a mountain of debt and a fantasy life built on my foundation. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that I recognized. It was a knockoff of a Tom Ford design likely rented or bought on a credit card he planned to default on. He looked the part. I had to give him that. He looked like success. But Sarah looked like a ghost. She was sitting next to him, wearing a red silk dress that I had bought for her 3 Christmases ago. It used to make her look vibrant. Tonight, she looked like she was attending a funeral. She wasn't eating. She wasn't drinking. She was staring at her phone, watching the screen go dark, and then tapping it awake again. She was waiting. She was processing the seed of doubt I had planted. She was thinking about room 412 and the man sitting next to her who claimed to be a faithful husband. Every time Jason laughed, a loud, boisterous sound that made the other diners turn their heads, Sarah flinched. She was seeing him clearly for the first time. She was seeing the performance. The waiters arrived carrying massive silver platters of lobster and Wagyu beef. It was a feast fit for a king, paid for by a man Jason thought was eating a microwave dinner in a snowstorm 4,000 miles away. Jason stood up to make a toast. He tapped his knife against his glass, the sharp sound cutting through the humid air. To family, he shouted, raising his glass high. To success, and to the freedom to live life on your own terms. Merry Christmas, everyone! The strangers cheered. His mother, Patricia, clapped her hands giddily, the stolen sapphire necklace glinting around her neck. Sarah raised her glass but didn't drink. This was the moment. The stage was set. The players were in position. It was time for the director to make his entrance. I adjusted the cuffs of my midnight blue tuxedo. It was bespoke, tailored for me in Savile Row 10 years ago, and it still fit perfectly. I had not worn it since my wife's funeral, but tonight it felt like battle armor. I ran a hand through my silver hair, ensuring every strand was in place. I took a deep breath, letting the tropical air fill my lungs. I stepped out from the shadows of the banyan trees. I did not limp. I did not hunch. I left the phantom of the frail old man back in the hotel room. I walked with the long, purposeful strides of a man who had walked through union strikes and hostile takeovers. I walked onto the grass, the soft turf cushioning my steps, making me silent. I signaled the band leader, a young man I had spoken to earlier that afternoon, accompanied by a generous tip. He saw me and nodded. He signaled his players. The upbeat Hawaiian music faded. The drums stopped. The ukuleles fell silent. A hush rippled through the lawn, starting from the stage and spreading outward like a wave. People stopped eating. They sensed a shift in the atmosphere. They sensed that the entertainment had changed from background music to something far more compelling. I walked straight down the center aisle between the tables. All eyes turned to me. I could feel their gaze. They saw a distinguished older man radiating a cold and terrible power. They didn't know who I was, but they knew I was somebody. I fixed my eyes on the back of Jason's head. He was still standing, glass raised, oblivious to the silence behind him, oblivious to the doom approaching. He was too busy basking in the admiration of the dentist from New York. It really is all about leverage, Jason was saying. You have to know when to push and when to pull. I stopped directly behind him. I stood there for a heartbeat, letting my shadow fall over his table. That is excellent advice, Jason, I said, my voice low, but projecting clearly in the sudden silence. I think it is time for the pull. Jason froze. It wasn't a normal reaction. It was the reaction of a man who hears a voice from the grave. His entire body went rigid. The glass in his hand slipped. It hit the table first, shattering against the bread plate, and then shards of crystal and red wine exploded outward, spraying the white tablecloth and his rented white dinner jacket. The sound of the breaking glass was like a gunshot. Jason spun around. He moved so fast he nearly tripped over his own chair. He grabbed the back of it to steady himself, his knuckles turning white. He stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, enormous, bulging with a mixture of confusion and primal terror. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at my face, then down at my legs, seeing me standing there without a cane, without a wheelchair, standing tall and imposing. Sarah gasped. It was a strangled sound. A sob caught in her throat. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling with instant tears. "Daddy," she whispered. The strangers at the table looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension, sensing the violence in the air. The dentist put his napkin down, looking uncomfortable. Patricia dropped her fork. It clattered onto her plate with a tinny sound. She looked at me with pure horror, her hand instinctively going to her throat to cover the necklace she had stolen. Jason finally found his voice. It was a squeak, a pathetic, high-pitched sound that didn't belong to a CEO of anything. "Dad," he stammered. "Dad." "What, you? You are in Chicago." I stepped closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to take a step back. I looked him up and down, taking in the wine stain spreading on his white jacket like a gunshot wound. "I was in Chicago, Jason." I said, my voice calm, conversational, but with an edge of steel that made the hair on his arms stand up. But the weather was frightful, and I realized I had missed my flight. Or rather, I missed the flight you told me didn't exist. Jason looked around the lawn looking for an exit, looking for an explanation, but how? You can't walk? The wheelchair? I ignored his stammering. I reached out and picked up the bottle of wine from the center of the table. I looked at the label. 1998 Chateau Margaux. The bottle I had sent him. "I see you enjoyed the wine," I said, placing it back down with a heavy thud. "It is a bold vintage. Expensive." Jason looked like he was going to vomit. B. Dad, what are you doing here? How did you get here?" "You don't have any money. Sarah said the trust is—" He stopped himself, realizing he was about to confess in front of an audience. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has cornered a rabbit. Money is a funny thing, Jason. It leaves a trail. And as for how I got here, I leaned in closer so that my face was inches from his, so that he could smell the peppermint on my breath, and I could smell the fear on his. I took a plane, Jason. Delta Airlines. Flight DL348. The same flight you were on. But I didn't sit in coach. I sat in Delta One. First class. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. It is surprisingly comfortable, Jason, especially when you pay for the ticket with the $50,000 you stole from a dying man's heart medication fund. The collective gasp from the table was audible. The dentist's wife covered her mouth. Sarah let out a small whimper. Jason turned a color I had never seen on a human being, a mix of gray and green. He looked at the strangers at the table who were now looking at him, not with admiration, but with disgust. I didn't... It's a misunderstanding, Jason tried to say, but his voice was gone. I stood tall, smoothing my jacket. There is no misunderstanding, Jason. I am here to check on my investment. And looking at this table, looking at this party, looking at the necklace my wife wore on our 40th anniversary hanging around your mother's neck, I would say my investment is performing very poorly. I turned to the dentist and smiled politely. I apologize for interrupting your dinner. My son-in-law has a habit of forgetting who pays the bills, but don't worry. The party is just getting started. I looked back at Jason, who was trembling now, actually shaking, as the reality of his nightmare crashed down on him. Sit down, Jason, I commanded, pointing to his chair. We need to talk about your portfolio. And by portfolio, I mean the prison sentence you are currently working toward. Jason laughed, but it was a hollow, brittle sound that cracked in the middle like dry wood. He looked around the table, his eyes darting from the shocked faces of his guests to the confused waiters hovering nearby. He stood up straighter, wiping the wine from his jacket with a frantic motion, as if he could wipe away the accusation just as easily. Ladies and gentlemen, please, he announced, his voice pitching higher with every word. I am so sorry about this disturbance. My father-in-law has been struggling with his health for some time now, specifically his mental health. He tapped his temple significantly, looking at the New York dentist with a pleading expression. Dementia is a terrible thing. It makes people imagine things. It makes them paranoid. He thinks he is a millionaire one day and a pauper the next. He obviously escaped from the care facility we placed him in back in Chicago. I have been worried sick all day trying to find him. Patricia stood up immediately, catching on to the lie, like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline. She rushed to Jason's side, putting a protective arm around him, while glaring at me with venomous eyes. "It is true," she cried out, her voice shrill and theatrical. "Oh, poor Harrison. He hasn't been lucid in months. He forgets who we are half the time. He has been telling everyone he is a CEO, but the poor man has been retired for 20 years. He gets confused about money. He gets confused about everything." She turned to the crowd, spreading her hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Please forgive him. He doesn't know what he is saying. He can be violent when he is having an episode. We need to get him his medication." Jason seized the momentum, pointing a shaking finger at the approaching security guards. "You there? Yes, you. Please escort this man off the property immediately. He is a danger to himself and others. He is trespassing and harassing my guests. Take him to the infirmary and call the police. I need to file a report for a missing vulnerable adult." The two security guards hesitated. They looked at Jason in his wine-stained jacket and his desperate, sweating face. Then they looked at me, standing calm and immovable in a tuxedo that cost more than their annual salaries combined. But an order was an order, and Jason was the one sitting at the VIP table. They stepped forward, their hands reaching for their radios. "Sir," one of the guards said, stepping into my personal space, "you need to come with us. We don't want to make a scene." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at the guards. I kept my eyes locked on Jason. He was smiling now, a small, triumphant sneer hidden behind his mask of concern. He thought he had won. He thought he could shout louder than the truth. He thought that because I was old, I was powerless. I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. It was the signal I had agreed upon with the audio-visual technician in the sound booth 50 yards away. A young man named Kai, whom I had spoken to 3 hours ago and whose student loan debt I had promised to pay off in exchange for 5 minutes of absolute control over the event feed. The stage behind the band went dark. The ambient music cut out completely. A high-pitched feedback squeal tore through the speakers, making everyone cover their ears. Then the massive LED screen that had been displaying looping videos of tropical sunsets flickered and turned a stark, blinding white. A document appeared on the screen. It was 50 feet wide and crystal clear. It was a bank transfer receipt. The crowd gasped. The text was large enough to be read from the back of the lawn. Sender Harrison Caldwell Medical Trust. Recipient Jason and Sarah Miller, joint account. Amount $50,000. Date December 20th. IP address location Glenview, Illinois. Residence of Jason Miller. I watched Jason's face. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing, like a fish on dry land. The dementia defense just evaporated. Senile old men do not hack into the resort's mainframe to display forensic accounting evidence. But I wasn't done. I nodded to the booth again. The image on the screen changed to a photo of Kelly, Jason's sister. It was a candid shot I had taken of her at the bar the day before. And then her voice boomed over the concert speakers, loud and distorted but unmistakable. "We left the old man back in Chicago, froze his ass off while we are living it up. Jason has the paperwork drawn up already. Power of attorney. He is going to convince Sarah that Daddy is too far gone to manage his own money. We sell the big house, move the old man into a facility, and boom, the fortune is ours." The recording crackled into silence. You could hear a pin drop on the grass. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a crowd realizing they were dining with monsters. Kelly, who was sitting at the table with a drink halfway to her mouth, dropped her glass. It shattered on the patio stones. She looked around wildly, seeing the judgment in the eyes of every stranger, every waiter, every guest. She covered her face with her hands. Sarah slowly stood up. She looked at the screen, then at her husband, then at her sister-in-law. The tears were gone. In their place was a look of horror so profound, it looked like physical pain. She had heard her own husband planning to lock her father away. She had heard them laughing about it. Jason tried to speak. He tried to say it was fake. He tried to say it was AI generated, but nobody was listening. The dentist from New York stood up, threw his napkin on the table, and walked away without a word. His wife followed him, shooting a look of pure disgust at Patricia. One by one, the other guests at the table stood up and backed away, leaving the Miller family isolated in a spotlight of their own shame. I stepped forward past the stunned security guards who had lowered their hands, realizing that I was not the villain in this story. I walked until I was standing right in front of Patricia. She was trembling violently. She was clutching her chest, trying to hide behind her son, but Jason was too busy hyperventilating to protect anyone. She looked at me with the eyes of a trapped rat. I looked down at her. My expression was not angry. It was disappointed. It was the look a judge gives a criminal before passing a life sentence. "You called me crazy, Patricia," I said, my voice amplified by the silence of the night. "You called me confused. But I am clear. I have never been clearer." I pointed a finger at her chest, specifically at the glittering blue stone resting against her skin. "That necklace," I said softly. "Do you know what it is?" Patricia stammered, her hand shaking over the pendant. It is a gift. Jason gave it to me. For Christmas." I took a step closer. The air between us crackled. "That is a lie," I said. "That sapphire is a cashmere, unheated stone. I bought it in London in 1982. I put it around my wife's neck on our 40th anniversary. I fastened the clasp with my own hands while she cried because she said she didn't deserve something so beautiful." I looked her in the eye. My wife Lillian was a lady. She was kind. She was generous. She would have given the coat off her back to a stranger, but she would never let a thief wear her heart. "You are wearing my wife's memory," I said, my voice dropping to a growl that made Patricia flinch. "You are wearing the symbol of a love you could never understand. And you are wearing it while eating food paid for with my money, drinking wine paid for with my money, and plotting to put me in a cage." Patricia looked at Jason for help, but Jason was staring at his shoes. She looked at Kelly, but Kelly was sobbing into her hands. She was alone. I held out my hand. "Palm up. Steady." "Give it to me," I commanded. Patricia hesitated. She looked down at the necklace. Greed is a powerful drug. Even in her shame, she didn't want to let it go. It was the most expensive thing she had ever touched. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't shout. I simply took one more step. The threat was clear. I was prepared to take it. With shaking fingers, she reached behind her neck. She fumbled with the clasp. It took her 3 tries because her hands were sweating so much. Finally, the lock clicked open. The heavy gold chain slid from her neck. She held it out to me. The sapphire caught the light of the tiki torches, flashing a deep melancholy blue. I took it. The metal was warm from her skin, which made my stomach turn, but I held it tight. I wiped it with my pocket square, cleaning away her touch, cleaning away the lie. I looked at it for a moment, remembering Lillian, remembering the night I gave it to her. Then I turned to Sarah. She was standing there alone at the edge of the table. She looked broken. I walked over to her. I didn't say a word. I simply held out the necklace. Sarah looked at it, and then she looked at me. She burst into tears. Not the silent weeping of the lobby, but loud racking sobs of a daughter who realized she had almost lost the only person who truly loved her. I placed the necklace in her hand. "Keep it safe," I whispered. "This time, keep it safe." I turned back to the table where Jason was still standing in the ruins of his fake life. The screen behind me was still glowing with the evidence of his crime. The police sirens were audible now, faint in the distance, but getting louder. The party is over, Jason, I said. The check is due, and you can't put this one on my card. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, but it did not last long, because a cornered animal eventually stops thinking and starts biting. Jason looked at the screen where his financial crimes were glowing in high definition, and then he looked at his mother, who was standing there bare-necked and sobbing, and something inside him just snapped. The veneer of the successful businessman dissolved completely, leaving behind the violent, impulsive child that I had always suspected lay beneath the surface. His face turned a shade of mottled purple that clashed with the pristine white of the napkins, and he let out a sound that was half scream and half growl. He didn't care about the guests anymore. He didn't care about the dentist or the investors. He just wanted to destroy the man who had pulled back the curtain. "This is my party!" Jason screamed, spitting saliva as he lunged across the table, knocking over a candelabra that sizzled as it hit the wet grass. "I paid for this. I am the VIP here. You are just a senile old man who belongs in a home. Security, get him out of here. Do your jobs." He scrambled over the chairs, moving with a clumsy, chaotic energy. Sarah screamed a warning, but I didn't move a muscle. I didn't raise my hands to defend myself. I didn't step back. I stood exactly where I was, my hands clasped behind my back, watching him come at me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. He was 3 feet away, his hands reaching for the lapels of my tuxedo, his eyes wild with the intent to hurt, to push, to silence me physically, since he couldn't do it verbally. "Security!" he bellowed again, his voice cracking. "Throw this old trash out!" The 2 large security guards who had been standing on the periphery moved instantly. They were big men, Samoan locals with necks as thick as tree trunks and faces made of stone. They covered the distance in 2 strides. Jason saw them coming, and a look of triumph flashed across his face. He thought they were coming for me. He thought his shouting and his rented suit and his stolen credit card still held weight in this world. He reached out to grab my shoulder, ready to shove me into their arms, but his hand never touched me. The lead guard, a man whose name tag read Tui, moved with a speed that belied his size. He didn't reach for me. He reached past me. His hand the size of a catcher's mitt clamped onto Jason's shoulder. The other guard grabbed Jason's wrist, twisting it behind his back in a professional takedown maneuver that was as graceful as it was brutal. Jason let out a yelp of pain and shock. "Hey, what are you doing? Get off me! He is the crazy one. Arrest him. Get down on the ground, sir." Tui said, his voice calm and bored. "Stop resisting." They swept his legs, and Jason hit the manicured turf with a heavy thud that knocked the wind out of him. His face was pressed into the grass right next to my polished dress shoes. He kicked and struggled, screaming about lawsuits and police brutality, but the guards held him pinned with practiced ease. The guests gasped and backed away further, creating a wide circle around the fallen king. Then the crowd parted again. Walking through the opening was a man in an impeccably tailored gray suit. He walked with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs of the onlookers. It was Mr. Arthur Penton, the general manager of the resort. I had known Arthur for 15 years. He was a man who ran his hotel with the precision of a Swiss watch, and he had zero tolerance for disorder. Jason, seeing the general manager, tried to lift his head from the grass. "You, manager. Thank God. Tell these gorillas to let me go. Tell them who I am. I am a platinum guest. I am spending thousands of dollars here." Arthur didn't even look at Jason. He walked right past him, stepping over Jason's thrashing legs as if he were stepping over a puddle of rainwater. He stopped directly in front of me. He straightened his tie, and then, to the absolute shock of everyone watching, he bowed his head slightly. It wasn't a servant's bow. It was a bow of deep respect from one equal to another. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly. "I apologize profusely for this disturbance. We tried to handle this discreetly, but when guests become violent, we have to intervene. Are you all right, sir?" I nodded slowly, adjusting my cuffs. I am fine, Arthur. Just a little disappointed in the quality of the company tonight. Jason stopped struggling. He lay there on the grass, blinking up at us, trying to process what he was seeing. The general manager of a 5-star resort was apologizing to the man Jason had called a pauper. Mr. Caldwell. Jason wheezed. Why are you calling him Mr. Caldwell? He is a nobody. He is retired. He is broke. Arthur finally looked down at Jason. His expression was one of cold disdain, the look one gives to a cockroach that has scurried across a clean counter. Mr. Caldwell is not a nobody, sir. Arthur said, his tone icy. Mr. Caldwell is the reason you are lying on this grass instead of in a jail cell right now, though that will be rectified shortly. I took a step forward, looking down at my son-in-law. The time for secrets was over. It was time for the history lesson. You always hated my stories about work, Jason. I said, my voice low and hard. You used to roll your eyes when I talked about supply chains and logistics. You called it boring. You said you were into big finance, high stakes. But you forgot one thing. Finance is just numbers on a screen. Logistics is the real world. Logistics is owning the trucks, the ships, and the steel. I pointed at the hotel towering above us, its lights reflecting in the ocean. 20 years ago, this hotel chain was facing bankruptcy. There was a massive dockworker strike in Los Angeles. Their construction materials were stuck in containers for months. They were bleeding millions every day. No one could move the freight. No one except me. I crouched down so my face was level with his. I used my private fleet. I pulled every favor I had with the unions. I got their steel and their marble delivered in 48 hours. I saved this company from defaulting on their loans. And when they couldn't pay me in cash because their liquidity was dried up, I took equity. I stood up and spread my arms, encompassing the entire resort, the pool, the lawn, the luxury that Jason had tried so hard to steal. I own 15% of this hotel chain, Jason. I am the second largest shareholder. Every time you swiped that card, every time you ordered a drink, every time you slept in that bed, you weren't stealing from a corporation. You were stealing from me directly. You aren't a VIP guest. You are a shoplifter who broke into my house and tried to throw a party in my living room. The crowd let out a collective sound, a mixture of shock and awe. The dentist looked at his wife and whispered, 15%. Did you hear that? Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of realization. She was realizing just how much she had underestimated the man who raised her. Jason went limp. The fight drained out of him instantly. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the weight of a shipping container. He wasn't just in trouble with the law. He had tried to con the owner of the venue. He was a small man who had tried to cast a shadow over a giant, and he had just been stepped on. I looked at Arthur. Get him up, I said. The police are waiting at the front entrance. I don't want him dragging down the property values any longer. The guards hauled Jason to his feet. He couldn't stand straight. His knees were buckling. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, his arrogance replaced by a pathetic terror. Dad, please, he whimpered. I can fix this. We can work something out. Don't let them take me. Think of the family. I looked at him, and then I looked at Sarah, standing tall, holding the necklace. I am thinking of the family, Jason, I said coldly. That is exactly why you have to go. Take him away, Arthur. As the guards dragged him across the lawn, his expensive shoes leaving trails in the grass, I turned to the crowd of stunned onlookers. I didn't smile. I simply adjusted my jacket and spoke one last time. I apologize for the interruption, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The drinks for the remainder of the night are on the house. My house. And as the band started playing again, hesitant at first and then louder, I walked over to my daughter and put my arm around her. The nightmare was over. But the cleanup was just beginning. The wail of police sirens cut through the tropical air, drowning out the distant sound of the ocean. It was a sound I had been waiting for all evening. 2 squad cars pulled up right onto the edge of the manicured lawn, their blue and red lights flashing against the palm trees, turning the scene of Jason's humiliation into a crime scene. The officers who stepped out were not the relaxed, tourist-friendly police one might expect in a resort town. They were serious men, and they walked straight toward us with a purpose that told me my lawyer Thomas had done his job perfectly. Thomas had faxed over a 20-page dossier to the Maui Police Department 2 hours ago. It contained the bank records of the unauthorized wire transfer, the forged mortgage documents, and the sworn affidavit regarding the theft of the sapphire necklace. By the time they arrived, they didn't need to ask questions. They only needed to identify the suspect. I watched as they hauled Jason up from the grass. He was crying now, openly weeping like a child who had dropped his ice cream, not a man facing federal charges. The officers spun him around, and the metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." In the first degree, one of the officers recited, his voice flat and professional. "You have the right to remain silent." Jason tried to struggle. "Wait, you don't understand. That is my father-in-law. He is confused. It is a family dispute." The officer ignored him, tightening his grip on Jason's arm. "The theft of jewelry valued over $10,000 is a Class B felony in the state of Hawaii. We have the item secured as evidence." They dragged him toward the squad cars, past the staring guests, past the ruined dinner table, past the life he had pretended to own for 3 days. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with betrayal, as if I were the one who had wronged him. I didn't look away. I watched until they shoved him into the back seat and slammed the door. The finality of that slam echoed in the silence left behind. But the cleanup wasn't finished. I turned my attention to the 2 women standing by the table, shivering not from cold, but from terror. Patricia and Kelly were looking at the departing police car as if their lifeline had just been cut, which in a way it had. Arthur, the general manager, stepped forward again. He looked at me for a cue. I gave him a subtle nod. "Ladies," Arthur said, his voice dripping with polite venom, "your reservation at this resort has been terminated effective immediately. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings from your rooms before security escorts you off the property." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. But it is the middle of the night. Where will we go? We have a flight tomorrow." I stepped forward, my hands in my pockets. "Actually, you don't," I said. They looked at me, their faces pale. "I bought those tickets," I said calmly, "and I canceled them 10 minutes ago. Delta Airlines has a very strict policy about fraud. When I reported that the tickets were purchased with stolen funds, they were quite helpful in voiding them." Kelly let out a screech. "You stranded us. You can't do that. We have no money." I shrugged. "That sounds like a logistics problem. And since I am retired from logistics, I am afraid I can't help you." Patricia turned on her daughter. "I told you this was a bad idea," she hissed, her voice rising to a panic. "I told you Jason was pushing it too far. You said it was safe. You said the old man was senile." Kelly pushed her mother away. "Me. You were the one drinking the champagne, Mom. You were the one wearing the necklace. Don't put this on me." They started arguing right there on the grass, their voices shrill and ugly, blaming each other for the disaster they had happily participated in just an hour ago. The security guards moved in, cutting their argument short. "Let's go, ladies," the lead guard said, grabbing them by the elbows. "You can figure it out on the sidewalk." I watched them being marched away toward the hotel lobby. They looked small and pathetic, stripped of the borrowed luxury they had worn so arrogantly. They had no money, no hotel, and no way home. They would likely spend Christmas Eve sleeping on a bench at the airport waiting for a wire transfer from a distant relative who probably didn't like them either. It was a harsh punishment, but life is a harsh teacher. Then there was only one person left. Sarah. She was standing alone by the empty table, her red dress fluttering in the breeze. She looked like a statue of grief. The guests had dispersed, the waiters were clearing the debris, and the band had packed up. It was just a father and his daughter under the moonlight. She turned to me and her knees seemed to give way. She collapsed onto the grass, not in a faint, but in a surrender. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. It was a raw, guttural sound, the sound of a heart breaking into pieces. "Daddy," she choked out. "Daddy, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the facility. I knew he was bad with money, but I didn't know he was evil." I walked over to her. My instinct, the instinct of a father who had bandaged her scraped knees and chased away her nightmares, wanted to pull her up and hug her. I wanted to tell her it was okay, but I stopped myself. It wasn't okay. If I comforted her now, she would learn nothing. She would think that tears were a currency that could buy forgiveness. She needed to understand the weight of her choices. I pulled out a chair from the table and sat down facing her. I looked down at my daughter kneeling in the dirt. "Get up, Sarah," I said quietly. She shook her head, unable to stop crying. "I can't. I am so ashamed." "Get up." I repeated, my voice sharper this time. "You are a Caldwell. We do not grovel. Even when we are wrong, we stand up and face it." Slowly, painfully, she climbed to her feet. She stood before me, trembling, her makeup running down her face, her hands clutching the sapphire necklace I had returned to her. I looked her in the eye. My expression was stern. "You chose him, Sarah. I warned you 5 years ago that he was a man who looked for shortcuts. But you said you loved him. You said I was being hard. So I stepped back. I let you choose." "I am sorry," she whispered again. "Sorry is not enough," I said. "You watched him disrespect me for years. You watched him spend my money. You sat in silence while he mocked me." "Silence is consent, Sarah. When you didn't speak up at dinner, you agreed with him." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "I was scared, Dad. He manipulates everything. He made me feel like I was crazy, like I was the bad wife if I didn't support him." "I know," I said, softening my tone just a fraction. "That is what con men do. They isolate you. They make you doubt your own reality. But tonight, the reality is staring you in the face. He stole from me. He cheated on you. And he planned to lock me away until I died." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Thomas had emailed it to me earlier, and I had printed it in the hotel business center. I placed it on the table between us. "What is this?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "It is a complaint form for the police and a petition for divorce," I said. I looked at her steadily. "I will pay for the lawyers. I will pay for the house. I will help you rebuild your life. But you have to make a choice right now. Tonight." I pointed at the papers. "You sign this. You testify against him. You tell the police everything you know about his fraud and his theft. You cut him out like the cancer he is." I paused, leaning forward. "Or you go with him. If you walk out of this hotel after him, I will get on a plane back to Chicago and you will never hear from me again. The trust will be dissolved and you will be on your own." "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "That is not fair." "Life is not fair, Sarah," I said firmly. "It is just a series of choices. You chose a husband over a father once. I am giving you a chance to correct that mistake. But I will not save a drowning person who insists on holding onto the anchor." I sat back and waited. The wind rustled the paper on the table. Sarah looked at the document, then at the police lights fading in the distance, then at me. She took a deep breath. She reached out and picked up the pen that was lying on the table left behind by the waiter. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes were clearing. She looked at the signature line. She didn't look back at the hotel. She didn't look back at the life she thought she had. She looked at the pen and she made her choice. Sarah stared at the divorce papers on the table, her hand hovering over the pen. The sound of the police sirens had faded, but the silence left behind was heavier, filled with the wreckage of the life she thought she had built. She looked at me, then back at Jason, who was now sitting in the back of the squad car, his face pressed against the glass, mouthing words she couldn't hear. Likely, please, likely lies, likely the same manipulations he had used to keep her small and compliant for 5 years. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking violently, but her eyes were dry. She didn't look at me for approval. She looked at the paper, reading the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." It wasn't just a legal document. It was an emancipation proclamation. She signed her name, Sarah Caldwell, not Sarah Miller. She pressed down so hard the pen tore through the paper slightly. Then she stood up. She walked over to the police car. The officer standing guard stepped aside, seeing the determination in her stride. She signaled for him to roll down the window. Jason looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. "Sarah, baby," he pleaded, his voice muffled by the glass. Tell them it was a mistake. We can fix this." "I love you." Sarah didn't say a word. She reached for her left hand. She twisted the diamond ring off her finger. The ring Jason had bought with money he claimed was a bonus, but was likely stolen from another unsuspecting investor. She held it up so he could see it glinting in the moonlight. Then she threw it. It hit him square in the chest, bouncing off his shirt and landing on the dirty floor of the police cruiser. "You don't love me, Jason," she said, her voice quiet but crystal clear. "You loved my father's money, and you loved that I was too weak to stop you. But I am not weak anymore." She turned around and walked back to me. She didn't look back as the car pulled away, taking the man she had married to a cell where he belonged. She reached out and took my hand. It was cold, but her grip was strong. "Let's go home, Dad," she whispered. The next 3 months were a blur of legal motions and forensic accounting, but for the first time in years, the house in Lake Forest didn't feel empty. It felt like a headquarters. Sarah moved back into her old room, not as a child returning in defeat, but as a woman rebuilding her foundations. We spent mornings at the kitchen table drinking coffee while I taught her how to read a balance sheet. I showed her the trust documents, the investment portfolios, the real estate holdings. I didn't hide anything. I wanted her to know exactly what she was worth, so no one could ever sell her short again. The trial was swift. The evidence I had gathered, the recording of Kelly the bank, transfers, the testimony of the hotel staff was overwhelming. Jason's public defender didn't even try to argue for innocence, he only argued for leniency. He didn't get it. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly dealt with financial predators before, sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. Patricia and Kelly were not charged, but they were financially ruined. Without Jason's scams to support them, they were forced to sell their trailer and move into a subsidized apartment in a town 3 states away. I heard they blamed each other until the end. Sarah was in the courtroom when the gavel fell. She didn't cry. She nodded once at the judge and walked out. She had started working at the logistics firm, starting in the operations department, not as a manager, but as a trainee. She wanted to earn her place. And watching her navigate the chaos of the shipping floor, watching her command respect, not because of her name, but because of her competence, I saw glimpses of the shark she had inherited from me. Spring arrived in Chicago, melting the snow and bringing with it a sense of renewal. I stood in the driveway looking at my reflection in the window of my Ford F-150. The truck was old, battered, and had over 200,000 miles on it. Jason used to hate it. He said it was an embarrassment. He said a man of my wealth should drive a Bentley. I smiled, opening the door and climbing into the worn leather seat. It smelled of old coffee and hard work. This truck had carried me to job sites when I was building my company. It had carried lumber for the treehouse I built for Sarah. And today it was carrying me to O'Hare Airport. But this time I wasn't running to catch a thief. I was going on a trip, a real trip. I checked the passenger seat. There sat a small leather journal, my wife Lillian's travel diary. She had made a list of places we would go when I finally retired. The Amalfi Coast, Kyoto in the spring, Patagonia. We never made it to most of them. Life got in the way, work got in the way, and then cancer got in the way. I put my hand on the book. I am going, Lillian, I whispered. I am going for both of us. I started the engine. It roared to life with a rumble that felt like a heartbeat. I looked in the rearview mirror. The man staring back had more lines on his face than he did 3 months ago. His hair was whiter, but his eyes were clear. The shadows of doubt, the fear of irrelevance, the weight of betrayal were gone. I wasn't just a father anymore. I wasn't just a CEO. I was a survivor. I backed out of the driveway, leaving the big house behind. Sarah was inside running the show now. She would be fine. She had the necklace in the safe and the steel in her spine. As I merged onto the highway, the skyline of Chicago rising in the distance, I thought about Jason sitting in his cell. He had mistaken kindness for weakness. He had looked at an old candle and thought the flame was dying. He forgot that a candle's flame is hottest right before it goes out. And he forgot that if you knock that candle over, you don't just get darkness. You get a fire that burns the whole house down. I turned up the radio, letting the classic rock drown out the noise of the world. I was 76 years old. I was alone, and I had never felt more free. 1 year later, the Amalfi Coast looked exactly like the postcards Lillian used to keep pinned to our refrigerator door. The water was a shade of blue that made you question if your eyes were playing tricks on you, and the lemon groves clinging to the cliffs smelled like sunshine and sugar. I sat at a small wrought iron table on the terrace of a cafe in Positano, nursing a double espresso and watching the world go by. Retirement, real retirement, was harder work than I expected. For 40 years, my mind had run on schedules, shipping manifests, and crisis management. Learning to sit still was like trying to teach a shark to meditate. But I was learning. I wore a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sunglasses that cost more than my first car, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a phone call, or so I thought. The peace was broken by a voice I recognized instantly. Not the voice of a friend, but the voice of a type. The ugly American tourist. I specifically asked for a table with a view. The voice boomed in English, cutting through the quiet murmur of Italian conversations. Do you know how much I'm spending at this hotel? I want that table. I turned my head slightly. A young man, maybe 30, was berating an elderly waiter. He was wearing a designer polo shirt that was 2 sizes too tight, and a gold watch that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. He was pointing at a table currently occupied by an older couple who were quietly enjoying their lunch. Sir, the waiter said in broken English, keeping his head bowed. That table is taken. Please, we have a nice table here. I don't want a nice table, the young man snapped, snapping his fingers in the waiter's face. I want that one. Move them. They're just finished anyway. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The same feeling I had when Jason used to talk down to the landscaping crew at my house. It was the arrogance of someone who thinks money buys permission to be less than human. I picked up my espresso, drank it in one shot, and stood up. I wasn't the CEO of a logistics empire here. I was just an old man in linen pants. But old habits die hard. I walked over to the young man. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy staring down the waiter. Excuse me, I said, my voice low, but carrying that gravelly timbre that used to silence boardrooms. The young man spun around, annoyed. What, can't you see I'm talking to the help? I can see you're making a scene, I said calmly. And you're ruining my coffee. He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. And who are you? The sidewalk police. Mind your own business, Grandpa. I smiled. It was the smile I used to give Jason right before I corrected him on a P&L sheet. My business is enjoying this view, and you are blocking it. The table is taken. The waiter is doing his job. Sit down at the empty table or leave. He stepped into my personal space, puffing out his chest. Listen, old man. I don't know who you think you are, but I can buy and sell this whole cafe. So why don't you go back to your nursing home and let the adults talk? The déjà vu was almost nauseating. It was Jason all over again. The same insecurity masked as aggression. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the manager. I opened the camera app and took a clear photo of his face. What are you doing? He demanded, taking a step back. I'm sending this to a friend of mine, I said, typing as I spoke. He runs the compliance division for American Express in Europe. I'm curious if the corporate card you're likely using to pay for this trip approves of abusive conduct toward service staff. It's a new clause in most high-end agreements. They hate bad PR. It was a bluff, mostly. I did know someone at Amex, but the clause was nonsense. But men like this lived in fear of losing their plastic status symbols. His eyes widened. He looked at the phone, then at me. He saw the bespoke shoes. He saw the watch on my wrist, a vintage Patek Philippe that whispered money rather than shouted it. He realized, just like Jason had, that he had miscalculated the food chain. Whatever, he stammered, his face flushing red. This place is a dump anyway. He turned and stormed off, nearly tripping over a chair in his haste to escape. The waiter looked at me with wide eyes. Grazie, signore, he whispered. Grazie mille. Prego, I said, slipping a €50 note into his hand. Buy the couple at the window a dessert on me, and keep the change. I sat back down, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just fixing problems for myself anymore. I was cleaning up the neighborhood one bully at a time. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't the Amex compliance officer. It was Sarah. I picked up immediately. Ciao, Bella. What time is it in Chicago? Isn't it 4 a.m.? It's 5 a.m., Dad. Sarah's voice came through the line, clear and sharp. But she didn't sound tired. She sounded energized. And I'm not sleeping. We have a situation. My grip on the phone tightened. Is it Jason? Did he appeal? No, Sarah said. It's worse. A man showed up at the house yesterday evening. A lawyer. He represents a private lending firm, a glorified loan shark operation out of Nevada. He says Jason signed a promissory note 6 months ago using the Lake Forest house as collateral for a $200,000 loan. I felt the blood drain from my face. The house. My house. The home I had built with Lillian. The home Sarah was currently living in. He has a document, Dad, Sarah continued. It has my signature on it, co-signing the loan. That's impossible, I said, my voice turning to ice. You never signed that. I know, Sarah said. But it looks real. They're threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings if we don't pay the full amount plus interest by Friday. That's $300,000. I stood up, signaling the waiter for the check. I'm coming home. I can be on a flight out of Naples in 3 hours. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to them. I'll call Thomas, and we'll bury them in litigation until they... Dad, Sarah cut me off. Her voice was loud, firm. Stop. I froze. Sarah, this isn't a game. These people are dangerous. You need me there. I don't need you to save me, Dad, she said. And then she said something that made me sit back down. I've already handled it. What do you mean? I didn't call you in a panic, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I called to tell you the story. When the lawyer showed up, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I invited him in, I made him coffee, and then I showed him the full. What file? The file you taught me to keep, she said. I pulled the GPS logs from Jason's car for the date the document was supposedly signed. Jason was in Las Vegas. I was in Chicago at a parent-teacher conference. I have affidavits from the school. Then I showed him the handwriting analysis from the divorce trial, proving Jason had a history of forging my signature. I listened, stunned. And then, she continued, I told him that if he filed a single paper in court, I wouldn't just defend the suit. I would file a countersuit for fraud and racketeering, and I would report his firm to the Nevada State Bar for predatory lending practices. I told him I had your lawyer Thomas O'Malley on speed dial, but I preferred to handle lightweights myself. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. And what did he say? He turned pale. Sarah laughed. He muttered something about a clerical error and left. He called me 10 minutes ago. They're dropping the claim. The debt is Jason's problem now. They can try to collect from his commissary account in prison. I sat there in the Italian sun staring at the phone. My eyes pricked with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated pride. The girl who had knelt on the grass in Maui, sobbing and broken, was gone. In her place was a woman who stared down sharks and made them blink. You did good, kid, I whispered. You did real good. I had a good teacher, she said softly. Enjoy your coffee, Dad. Don't come home. Stay in Italy. Go to Florence. Mom always wanted to see the David. I will, I said. I love you, Sarah. Love you too, Dad. The line went dead. I put the phone down on the table. The waiter returned with my change, but I waved him away. I looked out at the ocean glittering like a field of diamonds. I realized then that my work wasn't just about building a company or amassing a fortune. It was about this. It was about raising a daughter who could stand on her own 2 feet when the ground tried to swallow her. I thought about Jason sitting in his cell, probably blaming the world for his misfortune. I thought about the ugly American tourist running away from a confrontation he couldn't win. And I thought about Sarah drinking coffee in my kitchen in Chicago, ready to face whatever came next. The ledger was balanced. The cargo was safe. The ship had weathered the storm. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked toward the town square. I had a train to catch. Florence was calling, and for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't worried about what I was leaving behind. I was Harrison Caldwell. I was 77 years old, and my life was just beginning. The high-speed train to Florence cut through the Tuscan countryside like a silver needle stitching together patches of green and gold. I watched the vineyards blur past through the window, feeling a lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. For so long, my life had been measured in profit margins and quarterly reports. Now it was measured in moments. The way the light hit the cypress trees, the taste of a perfectly ripe tomato, the sound of my daughter's confident voice on the phone, telling me she had handled business. When I arrived in Florence, I went straight to the Accademia Gallery. I stood before Michelangelo's David towering 17 feet of marble that looked ready to breathe. I had seen pictures of it 1,000 times, but standing there in its shadow was different. I looked at the statue's eyes. They weren't looking at the victory. They were looking at the giant. They were focused, intense, unafraid. I thought of Sarah. I thought of her standing in the driveway of our home facing down a shark lawyer with nothing but a file folder and the truth. She was my David. She had faced the giant of debt and deceit that Jason had left behind, and she hadn't flinched. Jason was currently sitting in a 6x8 cell in a federal penitentiary, likely blaming everyone but himself for his fate. He was a small man who tried to cast a big shadow. But shadows disappear when you turn on the light. I spent the evening in the Piazza della Signoria, watching tourists and locals mingle under the statues. I ordered a glass of Chianti and toasted the empty chair opposite me. "Here is to you, Lillian," I whispered. We made it. It took a little longer than we planned, and the road was bumpier than we expected, but we made it, and we left something good behind. Not the money, The money is just fuel. We left a daughter who knows her worth. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. I took a deep breath, inhaling the history and the life around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a picture from Sarah. She was at the office, sitting at my old desk, looking at a stack of shipping manifests with a smile on her face. The caption read, "Captain on the bridge." I smiled and put the phone away. The ship was in good hands. The captain could finally rest. I want to leave you with one final thought before I sign off. There is a dangerous lie that we tell ourselves as we get older. We tell ourselves that our job is to keep the peace. We tell ourselves that if we just stay quiet, if we just write the check, if we just look the other way when someone disrespects us, we can keep the family together. We think that silence is the price of admission for love. But I learned the hard way that peace purchased at the cost of your dignity is not peace at all. It is surrender. For years, I let Jason make small comments. I let him treat me like a nuisance in my own home because I was afraid of causing a scene. I was afraid that if I spoke up, I would lose my daughter. But the truth is, my silence didn't save my relationship with Sarah. It almost destroyed it. By not standing up for myself, I taught her that it was okay to be walked all over. I taught her that love looks like submission. It wasn't until I stood up on that lawn in Maui and drew a line in the sand that she remembered who she was. You have to understand that takers like Jason do not have a limit. They will not stop because you are nice to them. They will not stop because you are generous. They will only stop when you build a wall and tell them they cannot pass. It is terrifying to stand up to family. It goes against every instinct we have as parents and grandparents. We want to nurture. We want to provide. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is close the wallet and open your mouth. You are not a burden. You are not a relic. You are a person with a history, with feelings, and with value that goes far beyond your bank account. If someone makes you feel like you are worth less than the space you occupy, show them the door. It is better to be alone and respected than to be surrounded by people who only love you for what you can give them. Your legacy is not the money you leave behind. It is the example you set. Show your children and your grandchildren what it looks like to have a backbone. Show them that even at 76 or 80 or 90, you are still the captain of your own ship. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt like your kindness was being mistaken for weakness, I want you to do two things for me right now. First, hit that like button to help this message reach other people who might be suffering in silence. And second, subscribe to the channel because we are building a community here of people who refuse to be invisible. I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time you had to draw a line to save your own peace. I read every single one. Stay strong, keep your head up, and remember that the only approval you need is the one staring back at you in the mirror.